The morning cycle in the Outer Survey Division of the Galactic Council rarely changed. Streams of data flowed endlessly through quantum relays, each packet carrying the story of a distant star system. Most of those stories were unremarkable. Cold rocks drifting in silence. Gas giants swirling with storms that would never be seen. Lifeless worlds waiting for suns that would one day burn out. Archivist Lethan Vire had spent 43 standard cycles cataloging them. He did not expect today to be different. His elongated fingers moved across the translucent interface, sorting incoming scout reports with practiced precision. His secondary eyes scanned atmospheric compositions, while his primary focus drifted lazily across gravitational readings. Behind him, the chamber hummed with quiet efficiency as thousands of other analysts processed the endless silence of the galaxy. Report 12. Barren. Logged. Report 13. Microbial traces. Logged. Report 14. Frozen ocean world. Logged. Routine. Predictable. Safe. Lethan reached for his cup of heated mineral infusion, taking a slow sip as he opened the next file. The display shifted, revealing a standard scout transmission from a long-range vessel assigned to an unremarkable sector near the outer spiral arm. Nothing about it suggested importance. Until the image rendered. He paused. The holographic projection stabilized in front of him, rotating slowly. A small yellow star. 8 orbiting bodies. Nothing unusual. Then his gaze settled on the third. Blue. Not the dull blue of frozen methane clouds or the faint shimmer of thin atmospheres. This was vibrant. Deep. Alive. White systems spiraled across its surface, wrapping around vast continents and endless oceans. Lethan leaned forward. Hydrosphere dominance, he murmured softly, more to himself than anyone else. His fingers flicked through the incoming data, pulling up atmospheric readings. Oxygen-rich. Stable pressure. Temperature ranges within optimal biological thresholds. Life. Not rare, but never ordinary. He adjusted the scan filters, isolating biosignatures. The results flooded his display faster than expected. Complex cellular structures. Diverse ecosystems. Predatory hierarchies. Migration patterns. Too much. Interesting, he whispered. Most life-bearing worlds developed slowly. Simple organisms, gradual evolution, predictable timelines. This was dense. Layered. Chaotic in a way that suggested constant pressure, constant change. His secondary eyes narrowed. He opened the next segment of the report. Behavioral observation. For a moment, nothing registered. Then the translation algorithms completed their pass. Intelligent life detected. Lethan set his cup down without realizing it. The file expanded automatically, prioritizing relevant data. Visual captures replaced raw numbers. Structures appeared across the surface, vast clusters of geometric formations. Artificial. Organized. Expanding. Cities. Primitive, by galactic standards. Inefficient energy usage. Fragmented governance. Limited orbital presence. And yet, his fingers slowed. They reached this stage already. He accessed the temporal analysis. The answer appeared, and for the first time in years, Lethan felt something break the monotony of his work. The species, self-identified as humans, had achieved industrial capability within a fraction of the expected evolutionary window. Too fast. He replayed the data to confirm. No error. He leaned back slightly, studying the visual feed more closely now. The beings themselves appeared on screen. Upright. Bilateral symmetry. 2 limbs for manipulation, 2 for locomotion. A single cranial unit housing primary sensory organs. Simple. Almost inefficient. Compared to most council species, their physiology was minimal. And yet they had built this. His gaze drifted across footage of their world. Massive cities glowing against the darkness. Machines crossing oceans. Devices launched beyond their atmosphere. Signals spreading outward into the void. Radio waves. Crude. Weak. But intentional. They were calling into the dark. Lethan felt a faint flicker of amusement. Eager, he said quietly. The behavioral logs continued. Humans exploring environments that should have deterred them. Frozen regions where temperatures dropped beyond survival thresholds. Deep oceans under crushing pressure. Elevated landforms with lethal atmospheric conditions. They went anyway. Not for necessity. For curiosity. He watched as one recording showed a group ascending a jagged peak, their bodies straining against gravity and thin air. Another showed them descending into the depths of their oceans in fragile vessels, surrounded by darkness that could swallow them whole.
Why?
The system offered no clear answer. Lethon frowned slightly. Most intelligent species optimized for survival. Efficiency. Stability. They avoided unnecessary risk. These beings seemed to seek it. He marked the observation and continued. Conflict logs appeared next. Fragmented political structures. Independent regions. Frequent territorial disputes. Weaponized technology, crude compared to Council standards, but increasingly sophisticated within their own scale. They fought each other. Regularly.
And yet,
Parallel data showed cooperation. Trade. Cultural exchange. Shared scientific advancement. Contradictory. Unstable. Fascinating. Lethon exhaled slowly, realizing he had not moved for several moments. He initiated a deeper scan of their technological progression. The timeline compressed sharply. Mechanical systems, to electrical, to digital computation, to orbital deployment. In less time than most species required to stabilize early agriculture. His primary eyes narrowed. That's not standard. He checked the scout's margin notes. No anomalies reported. No external interference detected. Evolution appeared entirely natural, which made it worse. He expanded the genetic analysis. Recent emergence of advanced cognition. Extremely recent. By galactic standards, the species had only just begun thinking, and they were already reaching for space. Lethon leaned back, the hum of the chamber fading slightly behind his thoughts. He had catalogued thousands of worlds. He had seen civilizations rise slowly, carefully, predictably. This was not that. He returned his focus to the rotating image of the blue planet. So small, so young, so active. For a moment, he considered flagging it for immediate review. Then he hesitated. The Council had protocols for this. Observation. Classification. Delay. Primitive civilizations required time. Early contact risked collapse, dependency, or worse. He had seen it happen before.
no.
Better to let them grow. Better to watch. His fingers resumed their steady rhythm as he began formal classification. System designation assigned. Biosphere level recorded. Intelligence confirmed. Contact status. Delayed. Standard procedure. Routine. Safe. And yet, as he finalized the entry, his gaze lingered just a moment longer on the visual feed of that blue world. On the signals spreading outward. On the fragile machines leaving its gravity. On the creatures who climbed mountains for no reason at all. Lethon Vire closed the file slowly. For the first time in decades, his work no longer felt routine. Because something about this world didn't make sense. Phase 2. Lethon did not move on to the next report. That, in itself, was unusual. The queue continued to scroll quietly at the edge of his vision, new systems waiting to be processed, filed, forgotten. Normally, he would have cleared a dozen more entries by now without a second thought. Instead, the blue world remained suspended before him, rotating in silent defiance of routine. He reopened the file. Not out of necessity. Out of instinct. The system responded instantly, expanding layers of data he had already reviewed. Atmospheric stability. Biodiversity density. Technological markers. All of it unchanged. Yet the unease lingered. He shifted focus to the evolutionary timeline again, this time slowing the playback. The progression unfolded step by step. Primitive organisms. Multicellular life. Complex ecosystems.
Then,
Acceleration. The curve sharpened abruptly, breaking away from every predictive model the Council used. Intelligence did not emerge gradually. It spiked. Rapid. Unstable. Explosive. Let-Han adjusted the parameters, checking for external catalysts. Gamma bursts. Stellar anomalies. Artificial intervention. Nothing. Impossible, he murmured. Most species required immense stretches of time to overcome biological limitations. Neural complexity. Social cohesion. Environmental adaptation. Each stage took millennia to stabilize. Humans had rushed through it. He expanded the genetic records further, isolating markers tied to cognitive development. Recent. Too recent. By Council standards, the species had barely existed long enough to be noticed. And yet they were already altering their planet. Let-Han brought up additional behavioral logs, this time filtering for anomalies rather than norms. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second before compiling results. The first clip appeared. A group of humans standing at the edge of a vast body of liquid water. Waves crashed violently against jagged rock formations. Wind speeds registered at levels most species would classify as hazardous. The humans stepped forward. One of them leapt. Let-Han paused the recording. They chose that. He rewound it, watching again as the individual plunged into the chaos below, vanishing beneath the surface before re-emerging moments later. Not survival behavior. Voluntary exposure to danger. He marked it and moved to the next. A frozen expanse. Temperatures far below biological comfort thresholds. Visibility nearly zero due to atmospheric interference. Humans traversed it. Not in desperation. In exploration. The third clip loaded. High altitude. Oxygen levels insufficient for prolonged activity. Terrain unstable. They climbed. Without external necessity. Without immediate reward. Let-Han leaned closer, his secondary eyes narrowing in concentration. Why? The question echoed faintly in his thoughts, unanswered. Most intelligent species avoided environments that threatened survival unless driven by need. Resource scarcity. Migration pressure. Defensive necessity. These beings seemed to ignore those limitations entirely. He continued. The system pulled deeper behavioral patterns. Conflict analysis. The footage shifted. Explosions. Fire. Impact weapons. Coordinated destruction. Humans at war. That, at least, was familiar. Conflict was not unique among intelligent species. Territorial disputes, ideological divisions, these were expected during early development stages. But the details. Let-Han slowed the playback again. The scale was disproportionate. Weapons capable of erasing entire population centers. Deployed by a species that had not yet achieved stable interplanetary travel. He accessed the technological breakdown. Atomic-level energy release. Weaponized. His primary eyes widened slightly. They reached this already. The timeline confirmed it. Too early. Far too early. He cross-referenced standard development charts. No match. No precedent. Most civilizations encountered atomic energy long after establishing stable planetary governance. After achieving unity. After developing safeguards. Humans had done it while still divided. While still fighting each other. He watched another sequence. A detonation. A city erased in light. Then silence. The data paused there, as if even the system required a moment to process it. Let-Han exhaled slowly. And yet, they survived. Not just survived. Continued. He advanced the timeline. Recovery. Reconstruction. Further innovation. Faster. Always faster. The pattern repeated across every dataset he opened. Pressure. Crisis. Adaptation. Growth. He pulled up a comparative analysis against other known species. The deviation curve spiked beyond acceptable variance. Humans did not follow the model. They broke it. Let-Han sat back, the faint hum of the chamber returning to his awareness. Around him, other archivists worked without interruption. Reports were processed. Data flowed. Nothing had changed. Except this. He shifted his focus to the signal emissions again. Radio waves extending outward into space. Unfocused. Unprotected. Unhidden. Broadcasting their presence. their language, their thoughts. Invitations. Lethan isolated one transmission, allowing the translation system to reconstruct it. The voice that emerged was uneven, filtered through layers of interference, but the meaning was clear. A greeting, an offer, a question. They were not hiding. They were announcing themselves. He felt a subtle tension form along his spine. Most emerging species feared the unknown beyond their world. They concealed themselves, limited their transmissions, approached the void with caution. Humans did the opposite. They reached out, blindly, confidently, as if expecting an answer. Lethan closed the transmission and returned to the planetary overview. Blue oceans, green landmasses, swirling clouds, peaceful, deceptively so. He hesitated again, his fingers hovering above the interface. Something was missing. Not from the data, from the context. He initiated a cross-reference check, linking the system's coordinates to the deeper archival network. The process was routine, standard procedure for newly cataloged worlds. Most searches returned nothing. A clean slate. He expected the same. The query executed. For a brief moment, the system remained silent. Then the results appeared. Lethan froze. Matches found. Not one. Multiple. He stared at the display, the numbers settling into clarity. 7 prior references. His secondary eyes flickered in confusion. That's not possible. The coordinates were precise. Error margins negligible. This exact system, had been recorded before. He opened the first entry. Ancient. Fragmentary. A passing notation. No detailed analysis. The second. Equally brief. The third. Lethan leaned forward, a faint unease tightening in his chest. Each record stretched further back in time. Thousands of cycles. Tens of thousands. Different civilizations. Different purposes. All intersecting at the same point. The same world. The same blue planet. His fingers slowed as he reached the final entry. The oldest. The file header was different. Not standard council format. Older. Much older. Marked with symbols he had not seen in decades. Recognition settled slowly. A name surfaced in his memory. A civilization long gone. Vanished without explanation. Lethan's gaze hardened slightly as he hovered over the entry. The file did not open immediately. Instead, a security barrier formed across the interface. Authorization required. Level far beyond his clearance. He stared at it in silence. A primitive world. A young species. And yet, its records were sealed behind restrictions meant for the most dangerous knowledge in the galaxy. Lethan Vire did not feel curiosity anymore. He felt something colder. Because whatever this world was, someone had already known about it, and they had decided it should not be touched. The clearance barrier did not flicker. It remained absolute, an unyielding wall of authority that no archivist at Lethan's level was meant to challenge. The symbols embedded within it pulsed faintly, ancient encryption layered over modern security protocols. That alone was enough to unsettle him. The Council updated its systems constantly. Old encryption was archived, studied, then replaced. Nothing from a vanished civilization should still be actively locking a file. And yet this one was active, protected, waiting. Lethan's fingers hovered above the interface for a long moment before he acted. He initiated a secondary request, routing through archival privileges, tagging the file for historical necessity review. It was a harmless workaround in most cases, enough to grant partial access to fragmented records. The system processed the request. Denied. Immediate. Final. A new message appeared beneath the barrier. Access attempt logged. Lethan exhaled slowly, forcing his posture to relax even as a faint tension settled deep in his frame. That was unusual. He glanced briefly across the chamber. No one was looking at him. No alarms. No intervention. Just the quiet hum of routine continuing as if nothing had changed. He turned back to the display. The file remained sealed. But the surrounding metadata, that was still accessible. Lethan began extracting what little he could. Date markers, origin tags, classification fragments. The oldest record was over 50,000 standard cycles old. The originating authority. His primary eyes narrowed. The Verex Dominion. A name rarely spoken anymore. Not because it had been forgotten. Because no one knew what had happened to it. They had not fallen. They had not been conquered. They had simply disappeared. At the height of their expansion. At the peak of their technological power. Gone. Lethan felt a subtle chill as he accessed the fragmentary notes attached to the sealed entry. Most of the text was corrupted or intentionally stripped. But one line remained intact. He isolated it, feeding it through the translation matrix. The system hesitated. Then the words resolved. Warning: Third world of designated star system contains classified biological development. Do not approach. Do not interfere. Under no circumstances initiate contact. Lethan stared at the line in silence. The translation rechecked itself automatically. No deviation. No ambiguity. The directive was absolute. He leaned back slightly, his mind attempting to reconcile the statement with everything he had just observed. Primitive civilization. Early technological stage. No faster-than-light capability. And yet, a directive that bypassed curiosity, bypassed study, bypassed everything the Council stood for. He accessed another fragment. This one more degraded, partially overwritten by time and system updates. Only a few words remained legible. Must remain undisturbed. Containment unsuccessful. Cycle incomplete. Lethan's secondary eyes flickered. Containment. He replayed the fragment again, ensuring the translation was correct. It was. The word did not change. Containment. He felt something shift in his thoughts. Not curiosity. Not confusion. Something closer to unease. He expanded the search, pulling in the other 6 historical references. They were far less restricted. Short entries. Passing mentions. Navigation markers. But patterns began to emerge. One civilization had detected electromagnetic emissions thousands of cycles ago. Primitive signals. Ignored. Another had charted the system as a waypoint. No interest. A third had conducted mineral scans. No valuable resources. Each encounter ended the same way. Minimal interaction. No follow-up. No colonization attempts. No research expansions. As if they had chosen not to look closer. Lethan frowned. That made no sense. Life-bearing worlds were among the most valuable discoveries in the galaxy. Even primitive ecosystems were studied extensively. Catalogued. Preserved. No advanced species would simply ignore them, unless they had a reason. He returned his focus to the sealed Verex file. The barrier pulsed faintly, almost rhythmic. Ancient. Persistent. Deliberate. Lethan hesitated. Then, against his better judgment, he attempted one more access. Not through his credentials. Through a historical key override. A system rarely used. A system that sometimes allowed partial visual access to restricted archives under the pretense of preservation integrity. The request executed. For a fraction of a second, the barrier flickered. Not open, but thinner. And in that instant, a single line slipped through before the system shut it down completely. Lethan didn't breathe. He didn't move. He simply stared at the fragment now burned into his display. The translation matrix struggled for a moment, then stabilized. The words appeared slowly. The subjects are not dormant by design. They are dormant by necessity. Awakening is inevitable. The system sealed the file again. Harder this time. All external pathways locked. A new notification appeared. Unauthorized access attempts have been recorded. Further interaction will result in disciplinary review. Lethan leaned back, his mind suddenly very still. Dormant. Awakening. The words echoed quietly, refusing to settle. He turned, almost instinctively, back to the visual feed of the blue world. Nothing had changed. Oceans moved. Clouds shifted. Signals pulsed outward into the dark. The humans continued their lives, unaware. Completely unaware. He isolated a live transmission again. The same pattern. The same open broadcast. A voice, faint but clear through the translation filter. A greeting. An invitation. They were asking if anyone was out there. Lethan closed the transmission slowly. His fingers hovered over the classification interface. Standard protocol dictated the next step. Finalize the record. Mark it for long-term observation. Move on. But the words lingered. Do not approach. Do not interfere. Containment unsuccessful. Awakening is inevitable. He felt the weight of them settle into place, heavy and immovable. This was not a routine discovery. This was not a simple catalog entry. This was something that had been seen before. Something that had been avoided. Something that had been feared. And now, it was no longer hidden. Because whatever had once been dormant on that world was already awake. Lethan did not close the file. He should have. Protocol demanded it. The warning signs were clear, the restrictions absolute, the implications far above his authority. Any other archivist would have finalized the entry and moved on, burying the anomaly beneath layers of routine. But he didn't. Instead, he opened the human behavioral logs again. This time, not as an observer cataloging a primitive species, but as something closer to an analyst studying a potential threat. The difference was immediate. Details he had skimmed before now stood out with uncomfortable clarity. He isolated survival records, natural disasters, planetary-scale events. The data unfolded in rapid succession. Mass extinction markers, environmental collapse cycles, sudden climate shifts, impact events powerful enough to sterilize large regions of the planet. Any one of them should have ended the dominant species, should have reset the evolutionary timeline, should have erased progress. Humans endured them. Not cleanly, not without loss, but they endured. Lethan slowed the playback. Each catastrophe left scars, visible, measurable, undeniable. Yet each time, the species returned. Stronger, more numerous, more advanced. He pulled up a comparative model. Other civilizations faced similar pressures during early development. Most failed. Those that survived adapted slowly, cautiously, stabilizing before advancing again. Humans did not stabilize. They accelerated. He shifted focus. Conflict logs. He had seen them before: primitive warfare, internal divisions, territorial disputes. Nothing unusual in isolation. But now he examined the patterns. Escalation curves. Innovation spikes. Adaptation cycles. The data revealed something far more disturbing than simple conflict. Humans learned from war. Not just tactically. Fundamentally. Weapons improved with each engagement. Strategies evolved in real time. Failures were not endpoints. They were data points. Lethan replayed a sequence of early combat records. Primitive projectile weapons. Crude. Inefficient. Refinement. Increased range. Improved accuracy. Mass production. The timeline compressed again. Chemical weapons. Energy release mechanisms. Atomic detonation. Each step reached faster than the last. Each iteration more destructive. And yet the pattern remained consistent. Crisis. Adaptation. Growth. He leaned forward slightly, his focus narrowing. They don't avoid failure, he whispered. They use it. The realization settled heavily. Most species evolved toward minimizing risk, toward reducing failure rates, toward stability. Humans appeared to do the opposite. They encountered failure and turned it into advantage. Lethan accessed environmental adaptation logs. The results only reinforced the pattern. Polar regions. Extreme cold. Humans established permanent presence. Deserts. Lethal heat. They built cities. Oceans. Crushing pressure. They engineered machines to descend into darkness. Even their orbital attempts, Early, inefficient, dangerous, did not deter them. Explosions, catastrophic failures, loss of life. And still they returned. Again and again. Each time with improvements. Each time with less error. Each time pushing further. Lethan's secondary eyes flickered rapidly as he processed the data. They don't stop. The words came unbidden. He did not like how true they felt. He shifted to psychological analysis. The system compiled cultural data, art, literature, recorded history. Patterns emerged quickly. Stories of survival. Narratives of overcoming impossible odds. Individuals facing certain death and refusing to yield. Celebrated. Repeated. Admired. He watched a reconstructed scene. A human standing alone against overwhelming opposition. The outcome irrelevant. The act itself, the refusal, was what mattered. Lethan felt a subtle tension coil within his thoughts. This was not just behavior. This was identity. He moved deeper. Recreational activity logs. At first, the results seemed almost absurd. Humans engaging in voluntary risk. Climbing sheer surfaces with no safety mechanisms. Leaping from extreme heights. Racing at velocities where minor error meant death. He replayed one sequence. A human suspended high above the surface, supported by nothing more than a flexible tether. They jumped. Not for survival. Not for necessity. For experience. Lethan stared at the recording. No species behaved like this. Risk was a cost. Danger was something to be minimized. Yet humans sought it. Tested it. Played with it. He pulled back, his thoughts aligning slowly into something far more coherent and far more unsettling. Every dataset pointed to the same conclusion. Humans did not evolve to avoid danger. They evolved because of it. The fragments from the sealed file echoed again in his mind. The subjects are not dormant by design. Awakening is inevitable. Lethan returned to the planetary overview. The blue world rotated peacefully before him. Cloud systems drifted across continents. Signals continued to spread outward. Nothing about it suggested threat. Nothing about it suggested danger. And yet, he no longer saw a primitive civilization. He saw a system that had produced something else entirely. Something refined by pressure, by failure, by survival. He accessed the Council's predictive modeling system, a simulation interface designed to estimate developmental outcomes for emerging species. He entered the human data, full behavioral patterns, technological progression, environmental adaptability. The system processed for several seconds, longer than usual. Then it generated projections. Lethan watched as the first scenario unfolded. External conflict. A more advanced species initiating contact through force. The simulation began predictably. Humans overwhelmed. Infrastructure destroyed. Population collapse. Then, deviation. Survivors reorganized. Fragmented resistance networks formed. Improvised weaponry. Unconventional tactics. The model accelerated. Within a short span, the humans adapted. Studied the invaders. Exploited weaknesses. Captured technology. Repurposed it. Improved it. The simulation timeline compressed rapidly. Years passed in seconds. The outcome shifted. The invading force weakened. Then collapsed. Then reversal. The humans expanded beyond their world. Lethan terminated the simulation. He sat very still for a moment. Then he ran it again. Different parameters. Stronger opponent. More advanced technology. The result changed, but only at the beginning. The end remained the same. Delay. Struggle. Adaptation. Victory. He exhaled slowly. They don't lose. The thought formed clearly now. They learn. Lethan closed the simulation interface, but the conclusion did not fade. It settled. Heavy. Final. He looked once more at the peaceful image of Earth. At the fragile signals reaching into the void. At the species that had no idea they were being watched. or feared. His fingers hovered over the classification system again. This time, the designation felt inadequate. Primitive. Developing. Harmless. None of those words fit anymore. Because what he was looking at was not unfinished. Not incomplete. Not waiting. It was already becoming something else. Something that no model could fully predict. Something that ancient civilizations had tried, and failed, to contain. Lethan Vire stared at the blue world in silence. And for the first time since he began his work, he understood why the file had been sealed. Because this species was not dangerous because of what it was. It was dangerous because of what it would become. Lethan did not trust conclusions drawn from instinct. That was the first principle of archival analysis. Data. Patterns. Verification. So he returned to the simulation system. This time, he removed uncertainty. He constructed the scenario carefully, layer by layer, feeding it every variable the Council possessed. Known galactic military doctrines. Technological ceilings. Resource limits. Environmental constraints. Then he added the human dataset. Not partially. Completely. Behavioral patterns. Adaptation rates. Technological acceleration curves. Psychological resilience markers. Every anomaly. Every inconsistency. Every contradiction. The system processed. Longer than before. The interface dimmed slightly as deeper predictive layers activated, restricted models rarely used outside of high-level strategic forecasting. Lethan watched without blinking. The first simulation began. Scenario: direct orbital assault. An advanced fleet entered the human system without warning. Superior firepower. Absolute control of space. Planetary defenses neutralized within minutes. The outcome was immediate. Human infrastructure collapsed. Cities burned. Communication networks failed. Billions lost. The system marked the scenario as a decisive victory for the invading force. Lethan did not stop it. He let the simulation continue. Because that was where the real data began. Weeks passed. Then months. Surviving human populations fragmented. They did not surrender. They did not attempt negotiation. They adapted. The system displayed scattered resistance clusters forming across the planet. Remote regions. Urban ruins. Underground networks. Primitive at first. Disorganized. Pattern alignment. Coordination. Improvisation. Weapons emerged. Crude. Unstable. Effective. Lethan leaned forward slightly. The simulation accelerated. Year 1. Human resistance had begun targeting supply lines. Not head-on confrontation. Disruption. Sabotage. They avoided strength. Exploited weakness. The invading force adjusted. Increased patrols. Stronger enforcement. More aggressive tactics. Human losses increased. The system predicted collapse within acceptable variance. But the curve shifted again. Year 3. Captured technology appeared in human hands. Not replicated. Repurposed. Modified. Used in ways the original designers had not intended. The simulation flagged the deviation. Lethan did not look away. Year 5. The first successful counterstrike against orbital assets. Localized. Limited. But successful. The system recalculated projections. Confidence in invader dominance dropped. Year 7. Human forces demonstrated tactical evolution beyond initial projections. Hybrid warfare models emerged, combining their own methods with adapted alien systems. The invaders' advantage began to erode. Lethan's secondary eyes narrowed. Year 10. The simulation reached a critical threshold. Human forces launched coordinated strikes across multiple fronts. Supply chains collapsed. Orbital superiority destabilized. The system paused briefly as it recalculated. Then continued. Outcome: human victory probability rising. Lethan terminated the simulation. Silence settled around him, broken only by the distant hum of the chamber. He initiated a second run. Scenario: controlled containment, no direct attack, a blockade, isolation of the human system, prevention of technological expansion. The simulation began. External forces established a perimeter. Trade routes diverted. No interaction permitted. Human signals continued. Unanswered. Years passed. Then decades. At first, nothing changed. Then, acceleration. Human technological development increased. Not slowed. Not hindered. Increased. Lethon frowned. He examined the data. Resource scarcity. Isolation pressure. Uncertainty. Instead of stagnation, the species innovated. Energy systems improved. Communication methods evolved. Theoretical physics models advanced. The simulation flagged a breakthrough. Year 63. Prototype faster-than-light theory. Unstable. Incomplete. But viable. Lethon's gaze sharpened. They solve pressure with progress. The system continued. Year 100. Human vessels achieved limited extraplanetary travel beyond expected constraints. The containment perimeter detected them too late. Adaptation again. Circumvention. The simulation ended with a projected outcome. Containment failure. Human expansion inevitable. Lethon closed the scenario. His movements were slower now. More deliberate. He initiated a third simulation. Scenario: cooperative integration. Early contact. Peaceful exchange. Technological sharing. The system began. Humans responded positively. Communication established. Knowledge exchanged. Initial projections stable. Then, acceleration. Again. Faster this time. Human adaptation curves spiked beyond previous models. Shared technologies were not merely adopted. They were improved, refined, combined with existing systems in unexpected ways. The simulation struggled to keep pace. Year 20. Human innovation output exceeded contributing species. Year 40. Independent technological branches diverged from original designs. Year 70. Human expansion began, not through force, but through influence. Trade, collaboration, cultural exchange, and with it, dependency. Other species began integrating human-modified systems. Faster, more efficient, harder to replicate without them. Lethon felt a subtle tension form again. Not fear. Something more complex. Year 100. The simulation reached a conclusion. Outcome: human-led technological dominance probability high. Not through conquest. Through adaptation. Through improvement. Through inevitability. Lethon terminated the simulation. This time, he did not immediately start another. He simply sat there, the weight of the results settling into place. 3 scenarios. 3 approaches. Tech. Containment. Cooperation. Different beginnings. Different paths. Same result. Humans advanced. Humans adapted. Humans prevailed. He exhaled slowly, the realization forming with quiet clarity. They don't lose. The words felt heavier now. More certain. Because the data supported them. Every outcome. Every projection. Every possibility. Led to the same conclusion. Not because humans were stronger. Not because they were more advanced. But because they changed. Faster than anything else. He turned his attention back to the blue world once more. It looked no different. Still peaceful. Still unaware. Still sending its fragile signals into the void. Lethon studied it in silence. The fragments from the ancient file echoed again, clearer than before. Awakening is inevitable. He understood now. Not as a warning. As a statement of fact. This was not a threat waiting to emerge. It was a process already in motion. Already unfolding. Already impossible to stop. His fingers hovered over the classification system one final time. Standard designations no longer applied. Primitive was inaccurate. Developing was insufficient. Dangerous. was incomplete, because danger implied intent. And this species did not need intent. It only needed time. Let Han Vier finalize the internal note, his movements slow, deliberate, precise. Observation priority, elevated. External interaction, not recommended. Projection, uncertain. He paused for a fraction of a second before adding one final line. Not part of protocol. Not part of standard classification. But necessary. Because no existing category could contain what he had seen. He entered it anyway. Outcome across all models remains constant. The humans do not fail. They adapt. And in that adaptation, they become unstoppable. The information was not supposed to leave the archive. That was the intention behind clearance levels. Behind sealed files. Behind warnings written in languages older than most civilizations still alive. But information, like pressure, had a way of escaping. It began quietly. A flagged access attempt here. An unusual data request there. Minor anomalies that would normally be ignored within the vast machinery of the Council's network. Except this time, they weren't. A junior aide in a peripheral translation wing noticed repeated pulls on ancient Verex linguistic matrices. Not common. Not rare either. But paired with increased access to restricted astronomical coordinates, it raised a question. Not an alarm. Just a question. Elsewhere, a logistics analyst reviewed updated trade projections. Routes that had remained stable for centuries were shifting. Gradually at first. Then with increasing frequency. Entire sectors were being marked as low-priority transit zones. One sector in particular. Unremarkable. Unimportant. Until it wasn't. Then there was the military. Fleet repositioning orders did not go unnoticed. They never did. 3 separate defense groups received quiet directives to adjust their patrol patterns. Not toward a threat. Away from one. No explanation. No engagement parameters. Only distance. Maintain distance. Across the galaxy, small pieces began to move. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns attracted attention. It reached the information brokers first. It always did. Whispers moved faster than official transmissions, slipping through trade hubs and relay stations, carried by those who made their existence from knowing what others did not. A phrase appeared. At first in fragments. Then whole. Kethera. An old word. Older than most languages still spoken. Few remembered its meaning. Fewer still understood its weight. But the moment it resurfaced, something ancient stirred alongside it. In a trading station orbiting a neutral star, a merchant captain paused mid-transaction as a coded message arrived from a trusted source. Coordinates. A warning. Avoid this region. No further explanation. He didn't need one. He adjusted his route immediately. The delay would cost him weeks. He did not hesitate. Elsewhere, in the fortified command center of a militaristic empire, a high-ranking general reviewed sealed orders in silence. His species had built its reputation on strength, on dominance, on never retreating from a challenge. The directive in his hands told him to do exactly that. Withdraw. Not regroup. Not prepare for engagement. Withdraw. The coordinates attached to the order triggered something deep within his memory. Training archives. Historical briefings. Stories dismissed as theoretical. He stared at the display longer than necessary before issuing the command. Entire fleets shifted course. Not toward war. Away from it. On a distant world of crystalline spires, religious leaders convened in quiet urgency. Ancient texts were removed from sealed vaults. Words that had not been spoken aloud in thousands of cycles were read once more. Prophecies. Warnings. Predictions of a time when something long dormant would rise again. Some dismissed them. Others did not. Across academic institutions, researchers began cross-referencing data that had not been relevant in generations. Disappearance records. Lost civilizations. Unexplained gaps in galactic history. A pattern emerged. Not obvious. Not clean. But consistent. Civilizations that had reached a certain point had vanished. No debris. No remnants. No explanation. Only silence. And each of those civilizations had, at some point, intersected with the same coordinates. The same region. The same blue world. The realization spread slowly at first. Then all at once. The reaction was not panic. Not immediately. It was something colder. More controlled. Avoidance. Trade routes shifted further. Exploration missions were quietly reassigned. Long-range probes adjusted their trajectories to ensure they would never pass too close to a specific system. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, everything had. Markets reacted in subtle but measurable ways. Defensive technologies increased in demand. Long-range habitation modules saw a surge in production. Insurance rates for frontier travel spiked without clear justification. No one said why. They didn't need to, because the idea had already taken root. Somewhere in the outer regions of the galaxy, something was waking up, and no one wanted to be near it when it did. Yet curiosity did not disappear. It never did. A small number of individuals, scholars, explorers, those driven by questions rather than caution, began moving in the opposite direction. Quietly, carefully, toward the coordinates others avoided. Not out of ignorance, but because of what those coordinates represented. A mystery. And mysteries demanded answers. Back in the Council archive, Lethan remained unaware of how far the information had spread. But he could feel the shift. Subtle changes in data flow. Increased access requests. Unusual patterns of inquiry. The system itself seemed tense, as if the network recognized something its users had not yet fully understood. He returned to the Earth file once more. Not out of obligation. Out of necessity. The blue world rotated as it always had. Unchanged. Unaware. He isolated the signal emissions again. They had grown stronger. More numerous. Humanity was expanding its reach. More satellites. More probes. More attempts to understand the space beyond their world. They were not slowing down. They were accelerating. Lethan observed a new transmission as it passed through the translation filters. A human voice. Clearer than before. More confident. Still carrying the same message. A greeting. An invitation. A question sent into the void. Are we alone? He closed the transmission slowly. Around him, the galaxy was already answering. Not with words, but with action. With distance. With silence. Because across countless worlds, among species that had survived for millennia, a single conclusion had begun to take hold. They were not afraid of invasion. They were not afraid of war. They were afraid of something far more certain. Contact. Lethan Vire stared at the image of Earth, his thoughts settling into a quiet, inescapable realization. This was no longer a hidden anomaly. No longer a sealed secret buried in forgotten archives. The knowledge was out. The pattern was spreading. And the galaxy was already preparing for something it did not know how to face. Because whatever humanity would become, no one believed they could stop it. So they did the only thing they could. They stepped back. And waited. The collision happened by accident. At least, that was how it began. On Earth, it was a routine observation window. Dr. Ayan Malik floated in the quiet hum of the orbital research station, one hand resting lightly against a console as streams of deep space data scrolled past his visor. Most of it was noise. Radiation fluctuations. Background signatures. Empty stretches of space mapped and forgotten. He almost missed the anomaly. A sudden spike. A mass reading where there should have been nothing. He frowned, adjusting the filters. "Hold on," he muttered, fingers moving faster now. "That's not right." The object appeared gradually on the display, resolving from distortion into form. Not debris. Not natural. Geometric. Structured. Artificial. Ayan's pulse quickened. "Control, I'm picking up something out here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Unidentified object. Large. Powered." Silence answered him for half a second. "Then repeat that, Ayan." He didn't need to, because the object moved. And in another part of the galaxy, someone else felt the impact. Commander Valari did not believe in coincidence. Not anymore. His vessel shuddered violently as the collision warning flared across the command deck. Systems flickered. A section of the outer array went dark. "What did we hit?" he demanded. His navigation officer hesitated. "Unknown." Valari's grip tightened slightly. They were not supposed to be here. No one was. Not in this sector. Not this close. "Scan it," he ordered. The results appeared almost instantly. Primitive construction. Minimal shielding. Inefficient propulsion. And yet, intact. It had survived the impact. Valari felt something cold settle in his chest. "Origin?" he asked quietly. The answer came with a delay that felt longer than it was. "Confirmed. Human." The bridge fell silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Every being aboard that ship knew the stories. Kethera. The proving ground. The world they were told to avoid. And now, they had collided with it. "Commander," the communications officer said, voice tight. "It's transmitting." Valari closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Of course it was. He opened them again. Put it through. Static filled the chamber. Then it cleared. The voice that followed was simple, unrefined, and completely unexpected. "Unknown vessel, this is automated probe Pioneer 7 from Earth," the transmission said. "We detected a collision event. Are you in need of assistance?" Valari did not respond immediately. He stared at the display, as if expecting something else to follow. A threat. A demand. A declaration. None came. Only silence. Then the message repeated. "Calm. Polite. Concerned. Are you in need of assistance?" Valari felt something shift inside him. Confusion. Disbelief. Because this was not what the legends described. This was not what the simulations predicted. He glanced at the damage reports. 17 injured. Systems compromised. Medical bay partially offline. He made a decision. One that would be remembered far longer than he could ever imagine. "Open a channel," he said. On Earth, the response nearly broke the room. Ion stared at his console as a new signal pushed through the static. Structured, intentional, undeniably alien. His breath caught. "Control," he whispered. "They're responding." The voice that came through was different. Measured. Careful. "This is Commander Valari of the Vessel Seeker of Truth. We have sustained damage and casualties." Ion didn't think. He didn't hesitate. "Copy that," he said immediately, heart racing. "We can help. Tell us what you need." Across impossible distance, across fear that had lasted 50,000 years, the first conversation began. And it was about help. Not power. Not dominance. Help. The response on Earth was immediate. Within hours, every available resource was redirected. Medical teams assembled. Engineers adapted equipment. Ships were prepared faster than any protocol required. Not because they had to. Because someone needed them. Captain Sarah Khan stood at the helm of humanity's most advanced vessel, her expression calm despite the weight of the moment. "This is what we've been waiting for," she said quietly to her crew. "Someone out there, and they need help." No one questioned her. No one hesitated. Because to them, this wasn't fear. It was purpose. The journey took less time than anyone expected. When the human vessel arrived, Valari was ready. Or at least, he thought he was. The airlock opened. He had prepared himself for something else. Something larger. Something overwhelming. Something dangerous. Instead, a human floated through. Smaller than most galactic species. Unarmored. Unthreatening. And smiling. "Commander," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Sarah. We're here to help." Valari stared at her for a moment longer than was polite. Then, slowly, he reached out. Contact. The moment passed quietly. No explosion. No collapse. No catastrophe. Just connection. What followed did not match any prediction. Human doctors worked alongside alien medics without hesitation, adapting instantly to unfamiliar biology. Engineers examined damaged systems with fascination rather than fear, offering solutions to problems they had never encountered before. Food was shared, not as strategy, as comfort. Laughter echoed through a ship that had been silent with dread only hours before. Valari watched it all with growing disbelief. This was not a species preparing for conquest. This was not a civilization waiting to dominate. These were beings who saw strangers and chose to help them. "Your people have been feared for a very long time," Valari said quietly at one point. Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Feared?" she repeated, genuinely confused. "Why?" He searched for the words. For the warnings. For the legends. "They said you would change everything." Sarah smiled. "Maybe," she said. "But not like that." Valari looked around his ship, at his crew, at the humans moving among them, not as conquerors, not as threats, but as allies. And for the first time since he had learned the name Kethra, he understood. They were dangerous, not because they destroyed, not because they conquered, but because they did something far more powerful. They connected, they adapted, they cared, and in doing so, they changed everything. When the human vessel departed, it left behind more than repaired systems and healed injuries. It left behind a new understanding. Valari stood at the observation deck, watching the distant blue world on his display. "So this is Kethra," he murmured. "Not a proving ground of destruction, but of something else. Something far more difficult to predict. Far more difficult to resist." Because across the galaxy, as the story spread and fear began to fade, a new realization took its place. The ancient warnings had never been wrong. They had simply been misunderstood. Humanity was dangerous, not because it would destroy the galaxy, but because it would reshape it. And there was nothing, no force, no barrier, no fear, that could stop that from happening, because the humans were already reaching out, already asking their question, already offering their hand. And now, for the first time, the galaxy was beginning to answer.